They said it wasn't humanly possible. All the power and excitement of Nintendo, right in the palm of your hand. Introducing Game...
Welcome back, horror fans. I'm so glad you stopped by. In past videos, we've had a look at horror games on handheld systems like the Game Boy Advanced, the GBC, and even Sega's Game Gear. Well, today, we're going even further back in time and having a look at horror games on the original Game Boy. First on the list, we have Hammering Harry and the Ghost Building Company. Known in Japan as Daiku no Gensen, this classic was created by a Japanese developer called Tamtex and was released exclusively on the Game Boy way back in 1992. The plot follows Hammering Harry as he attempts to rescue his wife. One day, numerous evil spirits suddenly appeared and began destroying the city. After everything was demolished, a sinister ghost city rose from the rubble, with a massive haunted mansion right in the middle. The evil specters suddenly kidnapped Harry's wife and retreated to the haunted house. Now it's up to you to save Harry's wife and defeat the group known as the Ghost Building Company. Each level opens up with a cutscene taking place in a movie theater. Here, we're introduced to the next ghost building. These clever intros insinuate that the entire game is actually a horror film. The first level really hypes up the horror movie vibe, as hockey mask wearing enemies attack you with giant meat cleavers. These enemy sprites are clearly inspired by the famous Jason Voorhees, and they do a great job at solidifying the game's B-horror movie theme. As the game's name suggests, you spend most of your time bashing enemies with Harry's comically oversized hammer. The hammer attack is simple and easy to use. The developers did a great job at making the combat easy and very user-friendly. Harry can also use his hammer as an umbrella and shield himself from enemy attacks. If Harry gets overwhelmed, he can also smash the ground, which will cause all enemies on screen to freeze momentarily. Each level contains 3 separate stages. Some stages do feature mini-bosses midway, but every level ends with Harry confronting a stage boss. The first boss is super easy to beat, but some of them can be tricky. However, despite the game being quite fair, you will die quite a bit as you navigate your way through each new stage. Luckily, you have unlimited continues, so you have plenty of opportunities to figure out each level and learn the patterns of each enemy. After defeating each stage boss, we're then treated to a short cutscene. Now these scenes aren't very long, but the animations are solid, and they do give the player something to look forward to. And to keep things interesting, the gameplay rotates between beat-em-up, platforming, and horizontal shmup stages. Here, we see Harry as he flies from left to right and must shoot down incoming enemies. These changes in gameplay were a nice bonus and really help prevent the entire experience from stagnating. Hammering Harry and the Ghost Building Company is honestly one of the best platformers that I've ever played. Horror fans will love the spooky vibe, but casual gamers are sure to have a good time as well. This beloved classic is not cheap though. Hammering Harry wasn't released in North America, but it was available in Japanese and PAL regions. Believe it or not, a loose European copy on PriceCharting.com is worth a whopping $592. Now the Japanese version is much more affordable, as a loose copy will only set you back about $22. The gameplay is pretty much the exact same in both versions, so in my opinion, the Japanese version is the wiser option. Whether you buy it or emulate it, this is one game that platforming fans have to check out. Up next, we have one of the most underrated horror games to ever bless the Game Boy. Let's play Alien 3. Based on the film of the same name, Alien 3 was released on numerous platforms back in 1992, and almost all of these different versions were developed by Probe Software. They were all run-and-gun side-scrollers, where you had to simply rescue former prisoners who had been taken hostage by the aliens. The Game Boy version, however, was created by a developer called Bits and Bytes. The version on Game Boy is completely different than every other version of Alien 3. The gameplay is overhead and sees the player exploring their surroundings while solving puzzles, finding hidden items, and dispatching enemies, not to mention managing resources. If this sounds like a survival horror game, that's because it kind of is. And remember, this was all before Resident Evil. The term survival horror hadn't even been coined yet. Sure, we had games like Sweet Home on the NES, but a true blue survival horror game hadn't really ever been done before. Alien 3 on the Game Boy has some serious survival horror elements at play, but no one ever seems to talk about how important Alien 3 is in the history of horror games, and how impressive it was, especially considering the hardware it was running on. I think Alien 3 can best be described as a slow burn experience. When the game first starts, there isn't even any enemies yet. This, however, gives you a chance to explore your surroundings and get familiar with the controls. Most puzzles that you'll encounter have to do with turning on and off the different fans in the ventilation system. This allows Ripley to make her way through. As I mentioned earlier, at certain points throughout the game, you'll need to find specific items to progress. This can be a bit tricky too, as some of the items are invisible on screen. This means you'll have to randomly click around your surroundings and hope you find what you're looking for. When you eventually encounter enemies, you'll start off with only a cattle prod, but eventually you'll acquire a pulse rifle, grenades, and a flamethrower, which is especially effective on unhatched alien eggs. The gameplay in Alien 3 can feel a bit prehistoric at first, but once you settle in, you'll find that Alien 3 is actually an extremely competent game and a must-play for fans of horror. A loose copy of Alien 3 is worth about $25. I had a lot of fun playing this one and would highly recommend checking it out. Up next, we have the best Game Boy game that you've never heard of. Let's play Super Bikkuriman. Now, this Japanese platformer has a bit of a weird origin story. Bikkuriman, which translates to Surprise Man, are a line of wafer snacks that are popular in Japan. Each wafer snack comes with 9 stickers, and these stickers had many different themes. But the most popular was the Devil vs. Angel series, which eventually led to various spin-offs, including anime TV shows and video games, one of which was a platformer for the Game Boy. The story follows protagonists Tiki and Phoenix, who, while trying to thwart the invasion of a demon army, were sent back in time to a different era. A magical tablet was the reason for their displacement in time. Now, they must find all the pieces of this tablet. If they fail, they'll be trapped in the past with an uncertain future. You have the option to play as Tiki or Phoenix. You can switch back and forth, but both characters play pretty much the exact same. As you side-scroll from left to right, you'll be attacked by all sorts of different creatures and monsters. At first, all you can do is punch them, but once you've killed a certain amount of enemies or collected a certain amount of power-ups, you can then transform your character into their angel form. In this state, Tiki and Phoenix have attacks that are more powerful, but the coolest upgrade you have in your celestial form is the power of flight. By simply jumping and holding up on the D-pad, your character will begin to hover. And once you're up in the air, you can stay there for as long as you want. If you want, you can even fly up and pretty much bypass entire stages. The developers, however, did think about this, and made sure to usually include airborne enemies as well. This way, the game isn't too easy. At the end of each level, you must then fight a stage boss. These fights aren't easy either. They're actually hard to defeat even once you've figured out their patterns. And the ability to fly won't help much either, as most of the enemy bosses also possess the power to become airborne. Thankfully, the game features a password system, so when you finally persevere and move on to the next level, the passwords will ensure you won't have to fight these terrifying bosses twice in a row. This game truly is a hidden gem, and is a must-play if you're a fan of the Game Boy. I couldn't find any sales data online, but there's plenty of copies available on eBay. The asking prices, however, are all over the place. I myself paid $14, so I wouldn't recommend spending any more than about $30, including shipping. Up next, we have Bram Stoker's Dracula. I've reviewed this game quite a bit in the past on different consoles, so I promise I won't spend too much time on this one. Bram Stoker's Dracula was released on multiple platforms way back in 1993. It is based on the film of the same name that was released a year earlier. Probe Software developed all the 8-bit versions. This of course includes the port for the Game Boy. You play as protagonist Jonathan Harker, who must escape Dracula's sinister castle. The first half of the game takes place in Transylvania. In the second half, the location changes to London, England, where you continue as Jonathan Harker, who must track down Dracula and end his reign of terror. Each level has a daytime and nighttime cycle. As you navigate your way through each stage, you will encounter all sorts of different enemies, such as ghosts, zombies, and skeletons. Your stock weapon is a knife, but you can acquire other weapons, such as axes, torches, and even a shotgun. At the end of each nighttime section, you will then face a stage boss, and these battles are actually pretty fun. The boss fights provide a decent challenge, but are actually pretty easy once you figure out their patterns. Over the years, the 8-bit versions of Bram Stoker's Dracula have actually kind of grown on me. The Game Boy port isn't anything special, but strangely, I did find the experience quite charming. On pricecharting.com, a loose copy is only worth $19. Up next, we have Casper, the Friendly Ghost. Based on the 1995 film of the same name, Casper saw numerous different releases across multiple platforms. While Funcom developed the versions for the Sega Saturn, 3DO, PlayStation, and Game Boy Color, the version for the original Game Boy was developed by Bonsai Entertainment. Now, I've played a lot of different Casper games over the years, and I've yet to play one that I truly enjoyed, but they've all at least had some redeeming qualities. This version, however, is definitely the worst. Each level consists of 4 lazy minigames that can be completed in any order. The final 2 minigames only appear at the very end. Each minigame is different, but the goal of each is to make it to the end with as much ooze or ectoplasm as possible, as this is needed to fuel the Lazarus machine that can grant Casper reincarnation. Now, I actually played this game back when I was a kid, but I could never really make it that far. I had kinda hoped that I might appreciate it more as an adult, but I still really did not enjoy my experience. However, if you're a massive Casper fan, it's possible you may enjoy this game, but otherwise, I'd recommend staying clear of this one. For those interested, a loose copy of Casper on pricecharting.com is only worth $6.75, so it's at least a cheap game. Up next, we have Metroid 2, The Return of Samus. In 1986, the world saw the birth of one of Nintendo's most popular franchises, Metroid. Players were introduced to Samus Aran, a cryptic bounty hunter sent to the fictional planet of Zebes to exterminate a dangerous species called Metroids. In 1991, Nintendo released the sequel, Metroid 2: The Return of Samus. While the first title was on their flagship system, the NES, Nintendo made the risky decision to release the sequel on their new handheld system, the Game Boy. Once again, you take control of protagonist Samus Aran. This time, Samus has traveled to the Metroid's home planet, SR-388. The Galactic Federation fears that the space pirates from the events of the first game may once again attempt to breed Metroids and use them as powerful bioweapons. Right off the bat, the first thing players will notice is just how much more versatile Samus is. The game features major enhancements. Samus can now crouch and fire her weapon. She can also jump while shooting straight down to destroy enemies and objects below her. Another nice bonus is the fact that you now begin the game with the ability to both shoot missiles and transform into your morph ball. The gameplay in Metroid 2 is far more user-friendly than the first one, but that isn't the only impressive upgrade. Due to the almost non-existent color palette on the Game Boy, Nintendo made the graphics crisp and extremely detailed. The black and white graphics resulted in changes to Samus's suit as well. Metroid on the NES used different color patterns to show the upgrades to Samus's gear, but without color on the Game Boy, the suit upgrades wouldn't be noticeable. To emphasize the changes, Nintendo made sure to feature visual indicators so players could tell which suit that they were wearing. Developers also changed Samus's Vario suit, adding large metal shoulder pads that have been a mainstay in Samus's suit ever since. As you navigate your way across the Metroid's home planet, you will encounter numerous creatures and hostile aliens. Similar to the original, the gameplay is non-linear and will have the player return to previously explored areas once they've acquired new abilities. Throughout the game, you'll be forced to confront several mini-bosses that must be defeated in order to move on. Each of these mini-bosses are Metroids at different stages of their metamorphosis. Metroid 2 really is a fantastic game and is a must-play for fans of the Metroid series. There isn't as much of a horror vibe like the themes featured in Super Metroid or Metroid Fusion, but I chose to include the return of Samus on this list as some of the boss fights, especially the final boss, are extremely intimidating.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
The other reason I included Metroid 2 on this list is that Samus really is one of the OG final girls, and if you read the story in the instruction booklet, it's clear that Nintendo really was trying to create a sci-fi horror experience. I would highly recommend checking this one out. If you're interested, on Priceturn.com, a loose copy will set you back $30.
Metroid 2: The Return of Samus, only on Game Boy. The future is in your hands.
Up next, we have a terrifying one. Just joking, let's play Gremlins 2. Based on the film of the same name, Gremlins 2 came to the NES and Game Boy way back in 1991. Both the NES and Game Boy versions were developed by Sunsoft. But despite having the same developer, the Game Boy and NES versions couldn't be any more different. While the NES version features overhead graphics with clunky gameplay, Sunsoft opted to create a fast-paced platformer for the Game Boy. You of course play as Gizmo, the cutest protagonist in the history of gaming. As Gizmo, you must side-scroll your way throughout Clamp laboratories and defeat the evil gremlins who have taken over. Oddly enough, Gizmo doesn't actually have an attack. You start off each level completely defenseless. All you can really do is jump around to avoid enemies. But weapon power-ups are available throughout each stage. There's pencils lying around that Gizmo can pick up and use for close quarters combat. There's also little boomboxes scattered throughout each level. If Gizmo collects one of these, he then gains the one-time use ability of throwing a music note, which, in my opinion, was always kind of weird. Aside from pencils and music notes, there's also lunchboxes that Gizmo can climb inside and hop around in. When this happens, Gizmo is basically invincible for about 15 seconds. Throughout the game, you'll also have to navigate your way through numerous platforming sections. Now these parts weren't too hard, but sometimes Gizmo's jump could be a bit wonky. I found that he was especially unreliable when jumping off springs. Sometimes this mechanic just wouldn't work properly, and that could be kind of annoying. At the end of each level, you must then defeat a stage boss. The boss fights are where the game really shows its comedic horror roots that made the movie so good. There's 4 bosses in total, each of which are different gremlin mutations from the film. The most impressive and terrifying is definitely the final boss, who is the horrifying Spider Gremlin. However, any horror ambiance created by the boss fights is instantly shattered when the bonus stages begin. These hilarious boxing minigames take place after each boss fight. Here, you'll get to see Gizmo doing his best impression of Mike Tyson. Gremlins 2: The New Batch isn't a great game, but it definitely isn't a bad game either. I probably wouldn't recommend this one to a casual gamer, but I have to admit, I did find certain parts of the game quite charming. On Pricechart.com, a loose copy is worth $16.98. Next up, we have the dreaded Fortress of Fear. This side-scrolling platformer was developed by Rare and came to the Game Boy way back in 1990. Fortress of Fear is part of the Wizards and Warriors franchise and takes place after the events featured in Wizards and Warriors 2 on the NES. You take on the role of a warrior knight named Kuros, who has set out on a quest to rescue a princess who was captured by an evil wizard named Malekith. The game features 18 linear levels that take place across 5 chapters. Throughout each level, our protagonist must battle his way through numerous monsters such as skeletons, bats, and giant snakes. As you navigate your way through each stage, you can find hidden items that include magical spells and precious gems. The magical spells, such as the Shield of Protection, will give our protagonist a power-up. Collecting the gems, however, is simply a way to increase your high score. You can also find food and ale that will restore your character's life force. But to unlock most of these items, you must first find a key that is hidden somewhere throughout the level. Only then can you obtain these hidden power-ups. At the end of each chapter, you must then defeat a boss. And these fights can be a bit tricky. If it isn't obvious, your character's movement and attack are incredibly clunky. Plus, the stage bosses are way faster than our protagonist. This can make defeating them a bit of a headache. But hey, at least the game is nice enough to apologize when you die. Despite the challenging gameplay, I still had a lot of fun playing Fortress of Fear. I probably wouldn't recommend this one though, as the gameplay can be quite tedious and frustrating. But fans of the Wizards and Warriors franchise will definitely appreciate this classic platformer. On Pricecharting.com, a loose copy of Fortress of Fear is listed at $12.25. Up next, we have another absolute classic. Get ready for Ghostbusters 2. Based on the movie of the same name, Ghostbusters 2 was developed by HAL Laboratories and blessed the Game Boy and NES in 1990. you're given the option to play as one of the 4 Ghostbusters. There's Peter Venkman, Ray Stantz, Egon Spengler, and Winston Zeddemore. With an overhead view, your mission is to stun and capture every ghost in each stage. You run around in a 2-man team, controlling one of the Ghostbusters. By tapping A, your character will fire their proton gun, which will stun the ghost that you're trying to catch. The other Ghostbuster moves around independently and is controlled by AI. When you've stunned a ghost, you can then tap B, and the AI-controlled character will send out a trap and catch the ghost. You will rinse and repeat this process quite a bit throughout the game. The good news is that catching the ghosts and executing this process properly is actually quite a bit of fun and doesn't become tedious. Each level takes place at a different building or location straight from the movie. The levels are split into 3 stages that take place as each floor in the building that you're in. Throughout each stage, you will come across the other members of the Ghostbusters team. You then have the option to switch out your lead Ghostbuster. This will often result in additional perks, such as axes that give you the ability to break down walls, or a power-up to your proton gun so you can destroy ghosts by simply shooting them. At certain points, you will cross paths with other characters from the movie, such as Lewis or Dana. When these NPC characters are found, they will provide health power-ups to you and your party. At the end of each level, you must then of course complete a boss fight. During the boss fights, you must blast them with your proton gun and slowly deplete their health. Fortunately, during the boss fights, the AI-controlled character is invincible. This way, your main priority can be offense. After each boss fight, we're then treated to short cutscenes that set up the next level. These cutscenes are fun and give the player something to look forward to. It's quite impressive how the developers were able to distinguish each character despite the prehistoric 8-bit Game Boy graphics. Ghostbusters 2 truly is a must-play game. I've had a lot of fun playing this one, and would highly recommend it. My only criticism is that sometimes the AI-controlled characters will get stuck on walls, but for the most part, they're fairly competent, and this doesn't ruin the game. Horror fans and casual gamers will both enjoy this one, but fans of the Ghostbusters franchise will especially love this masterpiece. On PriceCharting.com, a loose North American copy is worth $40.75. The Japanese or PAL version copy is a bit more affordable at $27. And before we move on, there's one more game from the Ghostbusters franchise that I should probably mention. The Real Ghostbusters was developed by Kemco and came to the Game Boy in 1993. This obscure game is based on the animated TV show of the same name that was released way back in 1986. Now, while the cartoon was critically acclaimed and loved by fans, the same can sadly not be said for this lazy Game Boy tie-in. You take on the role of lead Ghostbuster Dr. Peter Venkman, and must navigate your way through a labyrinth of 2D, maze-like environments. Enemies you encounter throughout the game must be jumped over, as you don't actually have any way to attack them. Strangely, you do still have your proton gun, but this is used to destroy objects blocking your path, instead of capturing vengeful spirits. So far, the game isn't exactly sticking to the TV show's canon, is it? And there's a good reason for that. You see, this isn't even a Ghostbusters game at all. Not really. You see, the Real Ghostbusters for the Game Boy was released in 1993 exclusively in North America. But earlier that year, the same game was also released in Japan under a different name. Welcome to Mickey Mouse 4 and the Magic Labyrinth. As you might have guessed, in this version of the game, you play as Mickey Mouse. And believe it or not, the story gets even more complicated from here, as the same game was also released a year earlier in PAL regions under a different name. Garfield's Labyrinth is the third and final incarnation of this strange game. In this version, you play as the famous feline known as Garfield. Now there's a long, complicated story as to why there's different versions of this game for each region, but in a nutshell, it simply comes down to licensing issues. Now honestly, the Real Ghostbusters isn't even that bad, but in my opinion, it was kind of sneaky to market this as a Ghostbusters title when there isn't even a single ghost in the entire game. And furthermore, the Real Ghostbusters TV show was awesome and definitely deserved a solid video game tie-in. Despite technically still being a Ghostbusters title, this definitely is not a horror game, and it is certainly not one to pick up if you're looking for an authentic Ghostbusters experience. But if this is one that you need for your collection, a loose copy will set you back about $42. Up next, we have an obscure game that people rarely talk about. Let's play Dr. Franken. This odd Game Boy exclusive was developed by Elite Systems and was released back in 1992. Ports for the NES and Sega Master System both had versions in development, but sadly, they were cancelled. The story follows Dr. Frankenstein's monster, who goes by Frankie. As Frankie, you must search a massive mansion and locate pieces of your wife's body. It's unclear why your wife Bitsy has been dismembered, but it's certainly a morbid premise, and goes along nicely with the game's light horror theme. Dr. Franken features 7 different levels that act as each floor of the mansion. In total, there's an impressive 230 different rooms. In fact, this game actually fits nicely into the Metroidvania category. Gameplay isn't linear. Instead, you must constantly backtrack to different levels and rooms as you acquire different objects and new keys. Throughout the mansion, you'll encounter all sorts of different ghosts and ghouls. Most of these enemies can be defeated, but some are seemingly invincible and must simply be avoided. To defend yourself, Frankie can shoot lightning bolts from his hands. Electricity is the currency for both his health and attacks, and power-ups can be found hidden throughout the mansion. The actual gameplay in Dr. Franken is pretty good, but the best part of the game, by far, is the music. The title screen features Bach's Fugue No. 2 in C minor. But even more impressive is the in-game music, as it features an 8-bit rendition of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, one of my favorite songs. A version for the Super NES was released a year later. It was called The Adventures of Dr. Franken, but in my opinion, the Super NES version is a completely different game. Not only was it made by a different developer, but the story and overall vibe is much different. The only thing similar is the premise of Frankie attempting to locate parts of his wife's body. Only in the Super NES version, her body parts are scattered around the world, not just the mansion. After playing this game extensively for this video, I would have to say that I actually prefer the 8-bit Game Boy version. It just has more of a prevalent horror theme. A loose American copy of Dr. Franken is worth about $14. A PAL version, which is what you're seeing here, is worth a few bucks more, but really, it's a pretty cheap game, so if you're interested, I would highly recommend checking it out. The Game Boy eventually received a sequel in 1997 that was created by a developer called Motive Time. The sequel sees Frankie frantically searching the mansion grounds for pieces of an ancient gold tablet. The mansion that Frankie resides in is past due on all of its utility bills, and he needs the gold so he can pay off the bank. Dr. Franken 2 has some solid graphics and animations. The gameplay and overall vibe is very similar to the original, although the music is not nearly as charming. For some reason though, I just didn't have a very good time with the sequel, so I probably wouldn't recommend this one to anyone. But if you're interested, a loose copy will only set you back 20 bucks. Now keep in mind, I haven't played the sequel nearly as much as the first one, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt. Up next, we have another classic. Let's play Gargoyle's Quest. This action-adventure platformer was developed by Capcom and made the Game Boy its exclusive home way back in 1990. Unknown to many casual gamers, Gargoyle's Quest is actually a spin-off of the Ghost and Goblin series. Nintendo and Capcom specifically developed this title for the Game Boy as they were afraid that Gargoyle's Quest may overshadow Ghosts and Goblins on their flagship console, the NES. You take control of Firebrand, a demonic gargoyle who's a bit of an anti-hero. Fans of Ghosts and Goblins may remember Firebrand as one of the many antagonists constantly trying to kill Arthur. Firebrand was more powerful than the other enemies and was almost kind of a mid-level mini-boss. As Firebrand, you must traverse the Ghoul Realm and complete various conquests in order to increase your power. The game features overhead and side-scrolling gameplay. There's an overhead map of the Ghoul Realm where Firebrand can walk around freely. It's very similar to Zelda 2 on the NES. As you explore, you will be randomly attacked, and when this happens, the gameplay then switches to a side-scrolling interface where you must defeat your attackers. At certain points, you will also discover enemy ghouls who are blocking your path. When this happens, you must confront them and slay all your enemies if you wish to move on. As you traverse the underworld, you'll come across different towns and villages that you can enter. Here, you can talk and interact with other residents of the Ghoul Realm. You can purchase items and upgrades and learn more about the fascinating lore surrounding Firebrand and his alleged destiny to become Defender of the Ghoul Realm. Once again, similar to Zelda 2, certain parts of the overhead map feature entire levels that must be completed in order to move on. These parts can be tricky, and are areas where you really have to use all the different abilities Firebrand has at his disposal. Firebrand can shoot projectiles from his mouth. They start off just as fireballs, but throughout the game, you'll acquire different projectiles that have different effects and uses. Firebrand can also jump and fly for short durations of time. There's a meter in the right-hand corner that shows how long you can remain airborne for. As you progress, this meter will eventually get bigger. The height of your jump and power of your attack will also progressively get larger. Another mechanic that is a large part of the platforming sections is Firebrand's ability to cling to walls. The game makes heavy use of this mechanic. There's numerous times where you must scale long, vertical corridors, jumping back and forth between walls. Parts of this game can definitely be tricky, especially when your powers are so limited at the start. But the gameplay never really feels unfair. Despite Firebrand being a little on the slow side, you always feel like you're in complete control of the situation, as Firebrand is very versatile and controls very tightly. Gargoyle's Quest is absolutely one of my favorite games on the Game Boy. Capcom really knocked it out of the park on this one. Horror fans will love this game, but casual gamers are sure to have a good time too. On PriceCharting.com, a loose North American copy is worth about $33. PAL and Japanese versions are a bit cheaper and will set you back about 15 bucks. Oh yeah, by the way, there was also a sequel on the NES called Gargoyle's Quest 2, The Demon Darkness. This NES game was available in all regions and came out in 1992. In 1993, it was actually ported to the Game Boy, although the handheld version was only available in Japan and China. It's actually an extremely accurate and faithful port of the NES game, and even has extra locations and levels that aren't available in the original version. Due to the extra content, some people even consider Gargoyle's Quest 2 on the Game Boy to be the definitive version. Despite having a smaller screen, the Game Boy port has almost the exact same level design as the NES version, which does create some problems for the platforming stages as you can't see what's in front of you. Despite some of the flaws though, Gargoyle's Quest 2, The Demon Darkness, is a great game, but in my opinion, not worth the cost. On PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $48.50. Up next, we'll be having a look at the Addams Family games, and we'll start with the less talked about Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt. Based on the 1992 animated series and developed by Ocean Software, the Addams Family Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt was first released for the Super NES. In 1993, a developer called Enigma Variations ported a stripped-down version to both the Game Boy and NES. This side-scrolling platformer sees the player attempting to complete a scavenger hunt proposed by his sister, Wednesday. As Pugsley, you must search the Addams Family estate and find items hidden in each room. The entire mansion is basically one big hub world, where each room is its own self-contained level. At the end of each level, you must then defeat a stage boss. These boss fights for the most part are pretty easy, but they will keep you on your toes. After defeating each boss, you will then free a captured member of the Addams Family. The Addams Family Pugsley Scavenger Hunt is a decent game and is definitely fun in small amounts. I probably wouldn't recommend it unless you're a huge fan of the franchise, but if you're interested, on PriceCharting.com, a loose copy is worth $22.22. The other Addams Family game available is one that we've had a look at before in the past. As Gomez, you must scramble to rescue the other members of the Addams Family, who have been taken hostage by the evil Abigail Craven. Developed by Ocean Software and released a year after the film, the Game Boy port is one of the many versions released on just about every console there was back in the early 90s. Similar to Pugsley's Scavenger Hunt, the player enjoys non-linear gameplay around the Addams Family estate, and must enter different rooms that are self-contained levels, each with a boss at the end. Honestly, these two Addams Family titles are almost the exact same game. The only real difference are the characters and the added side mission of the Scavenger Hunt. But once again, this Addams Family title is decent, but nothing too special. If you're interested, on PriceStarting.com, a loose copy will set you back $14. Okay, up next, we have another absolute classic. This one especially is very nostalgic for me, as I used to play this game all the time back as a kid. Let's play Kid Dracula. Back in 1990, Konami developed a game for the Famicom that was considered to be a parody of the Castlevania series. It was called Boku Dracula-kun, which loosely translates to I'm Kid Dracula. This became an immediate classic on the Famicom, and 3 years later, Konami would resurrect the character on the original Game Boy. Simply titled Kid Dracula, the Game Boy version is both a sequel and remake of its Famicom predecessor. You of course play as Kid Dracula, and must once again defeat his nemesis, the demon lord known as Garomouth. You start the game in Dracula's castle, and you only begin with 2 abilities. You can shoot fireballs from your hands, and similar to Mega Man, you can charge up your attack to do more damage. You can also transform into a bat, which gives you the power of flight. However, you can only stay in this form for a few seconds. Throughout each stage, you'll encounter all sorts of horror-themed enemies, and at the end of each level, you must then, of course, defeat a stage boss. Now these boss fights are actually a lot of fun, but they can be deceiving. Each boss fight is multi-tiered, and has different variations of whatever monster you're trying to dispatch. Just when you think you've won, and the boss sprite is shuffling off the screen crying, they'll suddenly return stronger than ever, with a new weapon and attack pattern that you must then navigate your way through. After each boss fight, Kid Dracula will gain a new ability. The game will then provide a quick tutorial on how to use your newfound power. Throughout each level, you'll also acquire coins that can then be used as currency. Between levels, you'll visit a cute anime witch where you can gamble your coins and try to win more. You can also spend your coins on minigames where you can attempt to win additional lives. These minigames are a lot of fun and really add to the entire experience. For example, in this minigame, called Stick 'em, you must stick as many swords as you can into this box without making the skeleton's head pop off. It's a game of chance where you're awarded more lives for the more swords you stab in. Between levels, the game also features little cutscenes that help to progress the story. These cute little animations aren't anything special, but they do add quite a bit to the game and give the player something to look forward to. Kid Dracula really is an excellent game and is a must-play for horror fans and casual gamers alike. Gamers that love the Castlevania series will especially appreciate this title, as characters like the antagonist Garomouth have also had minor roles in different Castlevania games over the years. This classic is not cheap though. A loose Japanese cartridge is the most affordable at $51.41. A PAL copy is worth $101, which is still pretty pricey. The North American copy is the worst at a whopping $187. And that's why it breaks my heart that I used to actually own this game as a kid. But at some point during my teenage years, I made the mistake of gifting this game to my little brother, which he then eventually sold. If I can give people one piece of advice, it is hold on to your games, because you never know which ones will one day be worth a fortune. Up next, we have the ghost with the most, Beetlejuice, horrific hijinks from the Netherworld.
Beetlejuice! I've never seen you look this bad!
By the way, did anyone know that Lydia was voiced by Alison Court, the same actress that played Lunette in The Big Comfy Couch? I was even more surprised to find out that Alison Court went on to voice Claire Redfield in every single Resident Evil game.
Wait! Don't shoot!
Get down!
Anyway, despite being very familiar with the TV show, I had never actually played the Game Boy title until making this video. I really wasn't expecting much, as I wasn't a very big fan of Beetlejuice on the NES, which was based on the film. However, I ended up really enjoying myself. It's a simple game and a lot of fun to play. You of course take on the role of Beetlejuice. Lydia's house has become infested with spirits, and creatures from the netherworld. As Beetlejuice, you must traverse her house and expel the unwanted guests. Similar to the Addams Family games, the house and surrounding property acts as kind of a hub world, where each room is its own self-contained level. When you enter a new room, there will often be several specters that must be dispatched before you can leave. Sometimes, there will be a mini-boss that must be defeated as well. I had a great time playing Beetlejuice, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. I think fans of the franchise will especially love this one. This game's not cheap though. On PriceDrawing.com, a loose copy is worth $69. Next up, we have another one of my personal favorites. This one's kind of a hidden gem. Get ready to play Avenging Spirit. This platforming classic was developed by Jaleco and hit the arcades way back in 1991. A year later, Avenging Spirit would receive its first and only port. Strangely, the Game Boy was the only console to ever officially receive a physical release. The story follows our nameless protagonist, who while walking home with his girlfriend one day, are suddenly ambushed by members of a violent crime syndicate. For some reason, the attackers attempt to abduct your girlfriend. The young man tries to be a hero and intervene, but in the process, is fatally wounded with a gunshot. Our protagonist then wakes up and is horrified to discover that he is now a ghost. An old man greets you and explains that he is your girlfriend's father, and that he has summoned your spirit to help rescue her from her kidnappers. You then learn that your girlfriend's dad is a scientist that's been working on a machine that can interact and capture spirits. It turns out that the men who killed you work for the mob, who wish to ransom your girlfriend in order to obtain the technology created by her father. The gameplay featured in Avenging Spirit provides an extremely unique experience. In your ghost form, you have complete freedom and can fly through enemies and walls. You have free reign over the entire stage and can fly wherever you want. However, you can only survive in your spirit form for about 15 seconds. You have an energy meter that will begin to immediately drain as soon as you leave a vessel. To take control of an enemy, you simply hover above them and tap the A button. There's over 20 different enemies throughout the game that can be possessed. There's a wide variety that includes vampires, robots, gangsters, and kung fu experts. Each enemy features different abilities that can then be used when you've possessed their body. As per usual, each level then ends with a unique boss fight. These battles vary in difficulty, but the biggest variable in each fight is which enemy character you've possessed and brought into battle. If you die in a boss fight and have extra lives, you'll restart the battle in whatever body you had died in. That's why it's extremely important to choose a strong vessel before entering each boss fight. Now on the surface, Avenging Spirit is a cute and cartoony platformer. But if you look a bit deeper, there are some pretty dark themes at play. Not only are you a ghost who's callously jumping from one body to the next, but when you choose to leave your vessel, the character that you are possessing instantly dies and turns into a corpse. Which, if you ask me, is pretty dark. I had a ton of fun playing Avenging Spirit. This is a great game and is actually one of the first games I ever downloaded on my 3DS. But unfortunately, that cheap option is obviously no longer available. To make matters worse, this Game Boy Classic is not cheap. On PriceStarting.com, a loose copy will set you back $182. Limited Run Games also re-released a physical version that is still quite pricey, but is a lot more inexpensive than an original cartridge. So if you're interested, I'd recommend hopping on eBay and seeing if you can buy one still for a good price, because I have a feeling that the limited run version will eventually become quite collectible as well. Next on the list, we have another sci-fi horror. Get ready for Alien vs. Predator, the last of his clan. Now, the Alien and Predator franchises need no introduction. In recent years, most people have seen the Alien vs. Predator movies, but I don't think many people know that these famous franchises have been the source of crossover content gold for over 3 decades. Way back in 1989, Dark Horse Comics brought the 2 extraterrestrials together for the first time. Eventually, we get the first movie in 2004 and another in 2007. But in between the creation of these comics and movies, there were 2 games released as well. One was for the Super NES, and the other was, of course, for the Game Boy. The story takes place on Alpha Centauri 3, a planet colonized by humans for the purpose of mining various mineral deposits. Unknown to the human colony, predators had placed alien eggs onto the planet's surface with the intention of returning to hunt them once they had finished their metamorphosis. But when the alien hunters returned, they discovered that the colony of humans had been wiped out, and that Alpha Centauri 3 was now infested with xenomorphs. The predator hunting party suspects that one of the eggs must have hatched a queen. This would explain the unusually high number of xenomorphs and the disappearance of the human colony. But due to the massive infestation of xenomorphs, your clan of hunters are wiped out. Now it's up to you. You are the last of your clan. The gameplay consists of classic 2D side-scrolling. Each level has long, maze-like corridors that are full of hostile aliens. You'll have to deal with facehuggers, chestbursters, and fully grown xenomorphs. To defend yourself, you have a melee punch attack. You also have your shoulder-mounted laser cannon and a cutting disc that can be thrown at enemies. But these weapons need ammunition, and you start each level with no items, so until you find some ammo, you'll be stuck using your punch attack. You also have your overhead map, and the Predator's famous cloaking device. However, both of these perks use up energy. The map is a constant strain on your energy meter, and your cloaking device will just deplete it even faster. Other than simply surviving the xenomorphs, each level has a locked door at the end of the stage. Somewhere throughout each level, there's a hidden key that must be found to move on. The last bit of problem solving that you'll have to contend with are destructible walls that can be blown up with bombs. Once again, you'll need to search the stage for bombs if there's a barrier blocking your path. Now, this is a game that I hadn't ever played before starting research for this video, and I have to admit, I had some fun with it. However, I probably wouldn't recommend this game to the casual gamer. Fans of the franchise like myself may enjoy it, but I think most people would be put off by the clunky and sometimes unfair gameplay. For anyone that wants to add this one to their collection, a loose copy on PriceCharting.com is worth $28.57. Before moving on to the homebrew games, there's one more trilogy that we have to cover. I'm of course talking about the Castlevania series. Starting with the first in the trilogy, we have Castlevania The Adventure. Developed by Konami, Castlevania The Adventure was released the same year as the Game Boy, in 1989. The story takes place a century after the events that took place in the first Castlevania game on the NES. You play as Christopher Belmont, a young vampire hunter who has set out on an 8-bit quest to destroy Dracula. This game contains 4 levels that must be completed in one sitting, as there's no saving or password system. Our protagonist is armed with the Belmont clan's favorite weapon, the Hunter's Whip. Unlike other previous Castlevania games, sub-weapons are no longer available. However, you are able to upgrade the whip, which then allows you to shoot fireballs when used. Watch out though, any damage that our protagonist receives will cause the whip to lose any upgrades acquired. As is the tradition in all Castlevania games, at the end of each level, you must then defeat a stage boss. Now these boss fights aren't too hard, but they're certainly no walk in the park. The first one though is especially easy. The hardest part about the boss fights, or any enemy encounter for that matter, is just how slow your character is. Honestly, when I played this for the first time, I thought there was something wrong with my game. It feels like your character's sprite is underwater when he moves around. This is especially a problem, as all the enemies are still quite quick. This can make combat very tedious and frustrating. And don't even get me started on his sluggish jumps. There isn't a lot of platforming, as the developers probably realized how unfun the experience was, but some stages do have some platforming sections, and these can be painful to get through. The game's only saving grace is the excellent soundtrack. The developers really captured the musical experience featured in past Castlevania titles, and made it work really well on a handheld system. And to give credit where it's due, the graphics are also quite good, especially considering this was one of the very first Game Boy titles available. Despite the game's historical importance, I really can't recommend it though. The gameplay is just too tedious and slow. But if you really have your heart set on beating this one, Castlevania The Adventure was re-released for the Game Boy Color in the Konami GB collection. In this version, your character's speed has been fixed, so the gameplay is far less frustrating. If you want an original copy, a loose North American cartridge is worth $14.99. A Japanese copy like mine will set you back $16, so if you want this one for your collection, it's at least a pretty cheap game. Next up we have Castlevania 2. This sequel was of course developed by Konami and came to the Game Boy in 1991. Set 15 years after the events that transpired in Castlevania The Adventure, Dracula has returned and has kidnapped Christopher Belmont's son. Once again, Belmont must embark on a quest to destroy Dracula and save not only his son, but all of Transylvania. Unlike Castlevania The Adventure, Belmont's Revenge has brought back sub-weapons in the form of axes and holy water. Similar to its predecessor though, this game features 4 levels, only you now have the option to complete them in any order. A password system is also featured, which makes playing the game and completing it a much more user-friendly experience. And speaking of user-friendly, the gameplay and speed at which your character moves has also been fixed. Christopher Belmont still moves a bit on the slow side, but the gameplay doesn't feel broken like it did in the first entry. Belmont's Revenge may not be the best Castlevania game around, but in my opinion, it's the best Castlevania title available on the original Game Boy. This game is not cheap though. On Priceturn.com, a loose copy is worth $63.29. And last, but certainly not least, we have Castlevania Legends, the black sheep of the franchise. Developed by Konami and released half a decade after Belmont's Revenge, Castlevania Legends stars Sonia Belmont and is actually a prequel to the entire Castlevania series. The game takes place in the year 1450 in Transylvania during the first incarnation of the original Count Dracula. At this point in time, Sonia Belmont was only 17 years old when she suddenly began to develop strange mystical powers. As the very first vampire hunter of the Belmont clan, she ventures out on a mission to stop Dracula and his reign of terror. Castlevania Legends has 6 levels in total and features a password system as well as an easy mode and standard mode. The gameplay is much smoother than previous entries, and Sonia can now move around quickly and can attack while crouching. She can also change directions in mid-air, making the platforming sections in combat a lot more fun and less frustrating. Strangely, the developers once again decided to remove sub-weapons from the equation. In their place, however, are items called soul weapons. Each level has a stage boss at the end, whom if you beat, will grant you a new soul weapon along with a new ability. Over the years, Sonia Belmont's character has unfortunately kind of faded into obscurity. She was supposed to be the main protagonist in a Castlevania game that was exclusive to the Dreamcast, called Castlevania Resurrection. That's what you're seeing here. However, that game was sadly cancelled, and to make matters worse, Konami eventually distanced the entire franchise from Sonia Belmont's character, and even went as far as to confirm that the story in Legends is non-canonical, which in my opinion was a bad move on Konami's part, as a female protagonist could have brought more fans to the franchise. Castlevania Legends is an okay game, but most fans think that Belmont's Revenge is a better experience on the Game Boy, and I'd have to agree. That being said, Legends has become a massive collector's item. It now commands a high price of $151. And don't get me wrong, I had some fun playing this game, but I could never justify spending that kind of cash on a game that is only okay at best. Okay, the first homebrew horror on the list is called The Dead in My Living Room. This disturbing horror was created by indie developer Meteor Arts. The story follows Jack, a nervous protagonist who awakens one night from a horrible nightmare, only to discover a dead body laying in his living room. As Jack, you must make it through the night with your sanity intact, and try to investigate the sudden appearance of a corpse in your humble abode. Throughout the game, you'll have to problem solve and mostly find hidden items to help progress the story. The game does an excellent job of constantly drip-feeding the player subtle jump scares and disturbing imagery. As the story unfolds, it becomes unclear if Jack is a victim of some supernatural entity, or if Jack himself is the true antagonist and monster. I ended up having a lot of fun with this one, and would highly recommend checking it out. The Dead in My Living Room is an excellent homebrew, and a must-play if you're a horror fan. And if you enjoy the game, the developer even has a short movie on YouTube called My Body. This terrifying short directly ties into the game's story and narrative. Find the link for the movie and download the game for free from itch.io. The next terrifying game on the list is called Cryohazard. This point-and-click horror was made by a fellow YouTuber called Burst Error. I've been a fan of his content on YouTube for some time now, but I have to admit, I had no idea that he had also dipped his toes into the world of video game development. And let me tell you, his first GV Studio joint, titled Cryohazard, does not disappoint. The story follows an unnamed protagonist who was recently awoken from a cryogenic slumber. He has no memory of who or where he is. Now, as the confused protagonist, you must navigate your way through the mysterious facility and try to find answers. The game features a first-person point-and-click interface, similar to classics like Shadowgate. As you explore the massive facility, you'll be attacked by hideous mutants and bloodthirsty monsters. When you encounter an enemy, you'll have the option to flee or stay and fight. However, your character won't always manage to escape, and sometimes fighting off your attacker is your only option. The combat consists of a turn-based battle system similar to classic RPGs. The combat interface isn't anything too special, but it was a nice touch, as many point-and-click games don't feature any action and can sometimes become a snooze fest. The disturbing story, competent gameplay, and stunning visuals make for a compelling playthrough. I had a great time with Cryohazard, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Download it for free from itch.io. Next on the list, we have a homebrew that's called Phobos Dare. This cryptic 2D platformer was developed by Apsir Games. You play as a guilt-ridden scientist named Seth. One day, you come across a Gameboy cartridge that is haunted by a malignant force. This discovery triggers a series of events where Seth must face his fears and relive nightmares from his past. The game begins in Seth's modest house. Your house acts as kind of your home base. This is where you sleep and cook meals. Outside, you'll find crops that can be harvested and sold for money. This is ultimately how you acquire money to buy food and items. As you enter the forest and other hostile areas, you have to worry about dangerous pitfalls and random spikes that are sticking out from the ground. The forest is also home to evil fairies that are dangerous to humans. Playing as Seth, the guilt-ridden scientist, you have no way to actually defend yourself from these creatures. All you can do is avoid them and hope they don't catch you. As Seth, you're also quite fragile. Touching any random spike or even bumping into a fairy will cause instant death. When this happens, you will automatically spawn at your last checkpoint. Throughout the game, you will find random tombstones that speak. Interacting with these gravestones will then trigger a checkpoint. These talking tombstones can then be used to save your progress or obtain hints and tips pertaining to your current mission. This game ended up being a very charming experience. I had a really fun time exploring the odd 2D world of Phobos Dare. My only complaint is that the developer didn't incorporate more music and sound effects. Otherwise, this is still a decent game. Download Phobos Dare from itch.io for $2.99. Or if you want, Limited Run Games also released a physical version, but nowadays it is not cheap. There's no sales data online, but there's plenty for sale on eBay, and most of them are still complete in box. However, most of these sellers are asking for at least $100 per copy, which in my opinion is way too much for any game. Next up, we have a little game called Lilith's House. This raunchy horror was made by a developer called Kendrick ML. Once again, the story follows an unnamed protagonist who finds himself trapped in the cryptic abode of a tantalizing woman named Lilith. To survive the night, you must explore her mysterious house and complete the different objectives she gives you. With a first-person point-and-click interface, the player must solve puzzles, fight monsters, and find a way to save both Lilith and themselves from an ever-changing house full of horrors. Will you become Lilith's savior or her next victim? The choices and decisions you make throughout the game will profoundly affect the ending. Now currently, there's only a short demo of this game available, but the complete game is slated for release sometime in 2025. For those interested, you can currently download the demo. You'll also have the option to buy the future game along with more content from the developer for $10.59. I ended up having a really fun time playing this one, and I can't wait for the full game. Not only is the gameplay extremely competent and user-friendly, but the exceptional 8-bit graphics combined with the perplexing story make this another game that's hard to put down. Lilith's House will certainly appeal to horror fans, that much I can guarantee, but I think casual gamers who enjoy a good point-and-click adventure will also enjoy this one. Download the demo or buy the full game from itch.io. Up next, we have a Game Boy demake of the very title that coined the term survival horror. Welcome to Resident Evil. The mansion is calling us back. Get ready to enter the world of Resident Evil on the original Game Boy. This excellent Resident Evil port was created by an indie developer called JJ1992, and man, did this guy do a good job. As someone who recently replayed Resident Evil on the PS1, I was shocked at just how much of the original game was featured in this fan-made port. So far, I've only played Jill's campaign, and there was a ton of gameplay packed into this little demake. Throughout the game, there are some bugs, and Jill's slow walking speed can be a little annoying, but for the most part, this is a pretty solid game, and a faithful and accurate demake of the original Resident Evil. This fan-made demake isn't as impressive as the unreleased Resident Evil for the Game Boy Color, but I still had a really fun time playing it. In fact, I even enjoyed it more than Resident Evil Gaiden, which is the only official RE release for any Game Boy. Resident Evil GB is an absolute must-play for horror fans, and especially gamers who love the original Resident Evil. Download it for free from itch.io. And while we're on the topic of Resident Evil on the Game Boy, I should also mention the other one available. Resident Evil Grim Beginnings was made by a developer called Grammy Games. It's actually less of a demake and more of a parody of the very first Resident Evil. The developer Grammy Games has infused a lot of his own humor into the story and dialogue. The characters also seem self-aware, that they're in a Game Boy game, as they are constantly breaking the fourth wall and pointing out how bad the graphics are. Somehow, the over-the-top comedy and retro gameplay blend perfectly. I honestly laughed out loud more than once while playing this. The developer is clearly a huge Resident Evil fan, and they did a great job of creating jokes that are both relevant and pertain to the franchise. The game's graphics also impressed me. Everything is surprisingly detailed and crisp. The gameplay is also fun and very competent. But combat can be a little tricky. The game features a combat system similar to Resident Evil Gaiden. With a first-person interface, the zombies will slowly approach you. After you've targeted a certain body part, a cursor will appear at the bottom of the screen. This cursor bounces back and forth, and you must stop it dead center in order to execute a shot. Now, I assume that this mechanic would eventually become easier if you played enough, but personally, I had a tough time, and usually struggle to make even one shot. As I mentioned earlier, I found the comedy in this game hilarious, but if you're someone who hasn't played the original Resident Evil a lot, you may not understand some of the jokes. For this reason, I probably wouldn't recommend this one to casual gamers, as they just wouldn't appreciate the humor. But this is definitely a must-play for fans of the original Resident Evil. Download Resident Evil Grim Beginnings for free from itch.io. Up next, we have another point-and-click adventure called The Harvest. Created by indie developers Steve Huskin and Epic Game Fan, The Harvest follows an unnamed protagonist whose car was broken down in the middle of nowhere while they were driving home for the holidays. Seeking shelter from the storm, our protagonist finds a desolate building that appears to be a long-abandoned industrial facility. Similar to games like Shadowgate or The Uninvited, you must problem solve right off the bat before entry into the strange building is even possible. When you finally enter the building, it becomes obvious quite quickly that this is no ordinary facility. You soon find a horrifying discovery. A husk of some bizarre humanoid creature is found hanging in a room with numerous tubes and wires connecting the creature to machines. Even more horrifying is the fact that this poor creature seems to be alive despite missing its vital organs. The rest of the game sees the player exploring the cryptic building while trying to find key items that will provide access to other locked doors within. Soon, our protagonist discovers other monstrous creatures throughout the facility. Each monster is different and can only be dispatched using a specific method and weapon. After destroying each monster, you must then retrieve certain body parts so they can then be fed to the strange humanoid creature missing its vital organs. But is helping this strange creature really a good idea? Or are you in fact reviving the worst monster of them all? The Harvest ended up being a fascinating game that kept me extremely intrigued throughout my entire playthrough. With the perfect combination of horror and mystery, this is another homebrew that I highly recommend checking out. Download The Harvest for free from itch.io. Next up, we have one of my absolute favorite indie horror games. Welcome to Bitterroot. This horror masterpiece was created by Horatio.nyc. This developer is becoming somewhat of a living legend in the Gameboy homebrew scene, as they've created quite a few retro horror games that have all been well received by fans. Bitterroot is a 2D side-scrolling survival horror game. The story follows an unnamed female protagonist whose car is broken down in the middle of nowhere. Stranded and desperate for help, she eventually comes across a large mansion that appears to be empty. She enters the house hoping to call for help, but soon she finds herself trapped in the dangerous web of the Bitterroot curse. As the unlikely hero, you must navigate your way through the many floors of the mansion and find key items to help you escape. As you explore the estate, you will be attacked by angry spirits and demonic entities. To defend yourself, you'll eventually find an antique camera that can be used to scare away the angry ghosts and ghouls. In my opinion, the camera being used as a weapon was definitely a subtle nod to the Fatal Frame series, but you'll also find that Bitterroot draws inspiration from other great horror classics like Resident Evil and Clock Tower. Bitterroot has excellent pacing and competent, exciting gameplay. The story and atmosphere makes for a compelling playthrough that I guarantee horror fans will love. I had a great time playing Bitterroot. This is one that I can't recommend enough. Download this 2D masterpiece for free from itch.io. Up next, we have a fan-made remake of Silent Hill, the play novel. This game was originally released on the Game Boy Advance, but was only available in Japan. Being an interactive novel, it was virtually unplayable for Western gamers. But fortunately, many fans have created English versions of this game, and now there's a port available that can run on the original Game Boy. This impressive port was created by Diega, a self-described newbie at video game development. This was Diega's first creation using the GB Studio. Every scene and digital still from the original Game Boy Advance title has been recreated to successfully run on the original Game Boy. The original game featured two scenarios, one featuring Harry and the other featuring Officer Sybil Bennett. So far, only Harry's story is available, but the developer has plans to expand on the game and recreate Sybil's scenario as well. I really enjoyed this remake, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Silent Hill fans will especially appreciate this one. Download it for free from itch.io. Up next, we have a game simply titled The Witch. This fun little horror game was created by a developer called Stoker. The story follows a boy whose dad has dropped him off to stay with his grandmother. His dad warns him that she's a little eccentric, but the boy soon discovers that his grandmother is not just crazy, but she is downright dangerous. As you may have guessed, the boy's grandmother is indeed a witch. And what's more horrifying is that she seems to revel in the psychological torture of her formerly estranged grandson. With an overhead view, you take control of the unnamed boy. Throughout the game, the witch will give you a series of missions that you must complete. The first of which is the easiest, as all you have to do is locate her missing cats. The Witch also features short platforming stages. When this happens, the gameplay changes to a side-scrolling interface where you must avoid enemy specters and usually find a hidden item. Some levels also feature a small mini-boss at the end, although I use the word boss loosely, as these fights are quite easy. Throughout the game, the story of your evil grandmother slowly unfolds, and we learn just how depraved she really is. I ended up really enjoying The Witch. It features fun, competent gameplay, and a decent story. It really was a fun little game. I also enjoyed the creepy cutscenes. The image of the witch's face I found especially disturbing. Purchase and download The Witch from itch.io for the low cost of just $1. This is one that I would definitely recommend checking out. Next up, we have another one of my personal favorites. Welcome to Opossum Country. This story-driven horror game was made by a developer named Ben Gelter. He's another indie developer that's made a big splash in the retro homebrew scene for the Game Boy. With an overhead view, you play as an unnamed pizza delivery man who's driven out to a secluded trailer park in the middle of nowhere. With no clear stipulation of who ordered the pizza, our frustrated protagonist must knock on each trailer door and attempt to find the resident who ordered the food. But right away, it becomes obvious that the residents of this remote community are extremely odd, and it's not long before our protagonist realizes that something is very wrong in this trailer park. Most of the gameplay consists of searching the trailer park and finding specific items that will help progress the story. As you explore the trailer park, you will meet and interact with all sorts of strange residents. But this game isn't just about problem solving. To mix things up, there's combat sections featured as well. When this happens, the interface changes to first person, where you must shoot rapid possums trying to attack you. The first-person interface is also triggered when the rifle must be used to remove certain barriers. This Game Boy masterpiece truly has a lot to sink your teeth into. The exceptional gameplay and creepy story makes this a must-play for horror fans. You can download Opossum Country for free from itch.io, but if you're interested, there's also a physical release available that contains two other great Ben Gelter games. It's called the Metamorphosis Collection and can be purchased from Incubate Games. A CIB copy will set you back $89.99. Next on the list, we have a game called Acumen Gaiden. This old-school platformer was made by a developer called Bikkuriman and was originally an entry in the GB 2012 Jam. You play as Sakura, a master yokai hunter who has vowed to protect her family from Orochi, a powerful yokai that resides in a vile castle called Acumen. As you make your way through the castle, Sakura will be confronted by numerous monsters that are all inspired by various Japanese yokai. And to defend yourself, you have your throwing stars as well as your trusty whip. As you can see, Acumen Gaiden and Castlevania have a lot in common. However, the movement and speed of your character is far smoother and quick compared to the sluggish Belmonts that we're all used to in the 8-bit Castlevania classics. Acumen Gaiden has 3 action-packed levels. Each level features 3 stages with a fun boss fight at the end. The first and second levels are actually really easy and shouldn't take you more than about 20 minutes to breeze through. The third level and final boss, however, are much more difficult and provide the player with a fun yet challenging experience. I had a lot of fun playing Acumen Gaiden. My only complaint is how the game lags if there's too many sprites on screen, but otherwise, this is a solid platformer. If you're a fan, the developer has also released a Game Boy Color version that has better graphics, extra content, and he has fixed all the bugs. Download Acumen Gaiden for free from itch.io. Next up, we have a disturbing game called The Death of Me. This unique medical horror was an entry for the GB12 Jam. It was created by a developer called Cambroth and was amazingly made in only 7 days. This medical sim allows the player to step into the shoes of a patient experiencing chronic illness whose symptoms get increasingly worse with each passing day. This interactive horror story features a young protagonist who decides to seek medical help for his acne, but what starts out as a simple treatment quickly spirals out of control as our protagonist experiences complications that suddenly evolve into a vicious cycle that gets worse with each new medication his doctor gives him. The entire story is completely scripted, as the game is more of an interactive movie, but your character's day-to-day chores feature an incredible amount of interactivity, as you must assist the protagonist as he showers, makes his breakfast, goes to the doctor, and takes his numerous daily medications. The Death of Me features surprisingly complex visuals, as well as a sad, yet gripping story. This one also features some uncomfortable themes that deal with declining mental and physical health. Now, if you're looking for a feel-good game with positive vibes, then I definitely wouldn't recommend this one. But this game does feature a unique experience and gives a horrifying window into the circumstances that many real people find themselves in. Personally, I had a fun time playing it. It's a nice fast game, and I highly recommend checking it out. If you're interested, you can download The Death of Me for free from itch.io. Up next, we have a game called The Melting Apartment. This terrifying horror game was developed by Flower Studios. The story follows a police officer sent to investigate a missing persons case. A young woman named Helen recently moved into an old building in a dangerous part of town. After days of no one hearing from her, Helen's concerned parents called the police and reported her missing. You play as an unnamed detective that must enter the cryptic building and find out what happened to Helen. The gameplay features an overhead point of view, but also has point-and-click sections that have a first-person interface. Most of the game is more of a visual novel, as you simply explore the building and question the various tenants who live there. But after speaking to only a few of the residents, it becomes rather obvious that something is very wrong in this building. Despite most of the game being quite scripted, there are parts where you must investigate your surroundings and find key items to help progress the game and the story. The first-person point-and-click sections feature some stunning visuals and really enhance the game, but my absolute favorite part is the climactic boss battle near the end, where you must shoot and kill a terrifying creature before it gets you and devours you alive. Now this game will run fine on an original Game Boy, but similar to games like Opossum Country, if you play them on a Game Boy Color or certain emulators, extra colors will sometimes be rendered on screen. Now, some might argue that this makes them technically Game Boy Color games, but in my opinion, if there's only ever two colors showing up on screen at once, they don't really meet the criteria to be considered a GBC game. Whether you're playing this on an emulator, a GBC, or an original Game Boy, The Melting Apartment is a captivating horror game that is really hard to put down. I had a lot of fun with this one, and I really can't recommend it enough. Download The Melting Apartment for free from itch.io. Next up, we have a game called Sacred Meat, and let me give you a heads up. This is kind of a weird one. Sacred Meat is a point-and-click horror game that was originally created as an entry for the GB Combo 23 Jam. That year, the theme was You Are the Monster. Created by indie developer Wrong Way Games, you play as Jonah, a man struggling with the daily grind of taking care of his elderly father, all the while trying to reconcile the traumatic past they both share. While most of the game features a point-and-click interface, the developer also incorporated many other minigames that occur at preset points. The various minigames featured in Sacred Meat were a nice touch. They really help to keep the game interesting. One of my favorites takes place at the very beginning of the game, where you must scroll vertically and try to outrun a giant cave-dwelling scorpion monster. But most of the game is spent as Jonah, as you take care of seemingly normal everyday chores, most of which involves taking care of your aging father, who, if I'm going to be honest, looks more like an aging corpse. As Jonah, you can explore the entire house and interact with just about every object. The developer was very thorough in this respect. I was quite shocked, as you don't expect this much detail in a Game Boy game, let alone a free homebrew. Throughout the game, you'll need to solve puzzles, find and use specific items, and complete certain missions in order to move on. I haven't played this one all the way through, but apparently there's 2 different endings, as well as a bonus scene that can be unlocked. Now just a heads up, this game does deal with some uncomfortable topics and has some very depressing undertones, so it may not be for everyone. I, for one though, enjoyed my experience, and I fully intend on returning to this game and trying to unlock both endings. Download Sacred Meat free of charge from itch.io. Next on the list, we have a game called Hermono. This horror-themed platformer was developed by the Pat Moretta team and was the winner of the 2023 GB Combo Jam, where the theme was You Are the Monster. The game begins with a short yet adorable cutscene of a little boy crying in front of his brother's grave, when suddenly, a cartoonish demon bursts from the ground and kidnaps the little boy. Sensing danger, his older brother erupts from his own grave and shouts his name, Hermono. After this short yet gripping intro video, you start your journey as the undead child known as Nano. From here, you must navigate your way through stages full of supernatural enemies and find hidden keys that will allow you to move on to the next level. To defend yourself, Nano can detach his head and throw it like a boomerang. Hermono features cute graphics and simple gameplay very reminiscent of classics like Ghosts and Goblins, Kid Dracula, and of course, Decap Attack. Hermono is an extremely polished game and one that I had a lot of fun playing. I would highly recommend this one to both the horror fan and the casual gamer. A free demo of Hermono is currently available on itch.io, and if you want, you can purchase the entire game for $9.99. Up next, we have a game called Project Trap. Many people may find this one strangely familiar. This spooky little gem was created by a rather well-known developer called Elvies. This developer has created other great games over the years such as Days Without and Nightmare the Ninth King. Elvies often develops games specifically for the Game Boy Color, but now and then they go back to basics and develop for the original Game Boy. Once again, you play as an unnamed protagonist. You wake up in a strange room with no memory of how you got there. After exiting the room, you find yourself in a long, mysterious hallway. After investigating, you find that escape is seemingly impossible, as the exit door at the end leads you back to the very beginning of the hallway in an endless loop. As I mentioned earlier, Project Trap's premise may seem quite familiar to many gamers, and there's a good reason for that. That's because Project Trap is essentially a Game Boy demake of PT, the famous Silent Hills demo made by legendary developer Hideo Kojima. For those that don't know, PT stood for Playable Teaser, and was a short yet groundbreaking horror game that mesmerized the world. But when Konami had a falling out with Hideo Kojima, PT's creator, they cancelled his next game, Silent Hills, and out of spite, removed PT from the PlayStation Network. Ever since the unexpected removal of this beloved horror game, fans have been making homemade versions in an attempt to restore this important piece of lost media. And let me tell you this, the Game Boy remake does a pretty damn good job of capturing the atmosphere and vibes from the original PT. Between the amazing 8-bit graphics, the disturbing storyline, and the clever jump scares, Project Trap is an absolute must-play for horror fans. You can download Project Trap for free from itch.io. While making this video, I was surprised to find out that Project Trap isn't the only PT remake available for the Game Boy. 204.863 was created by an indie developer named JohnShaw01. Project Trap had a different story and was more of a PT-inspired game, while 204.863 is pretty much an exact remake of PT, as the developer was clearly trying to recreate the experience on the original Game Boy. Once again, you must traverse the endless hallway and slowly attempt to find a way out. As you investigate, you soon discover that you are not alone in this cryptic hallway and that you're one jump scare away from a game over. I truly enjoyed this accurate and faithful remake of the legendary demo, PT. Once again, the Game Boy has proven itself as an amazing platform to run horror games from both the past and present. I highly recommend checking out 204.863. I think both horror fans and casual fans will really enjoy this one. Download this creepy remake for free from itch.io. Up next, we have Traumatarium. This first-person dungeon crawler is another game by Horatio.nyc. The story follows a deadly famine and drought that has consumed a long-forgotten kingdom. Stories of an ancient evil reawakening in the mountains have spread like wildfire across the people affected by this curse. The queen of this ancient kingdom has selected you to find the source of this evil and put an end to it. Welcome to Traumatarium. After the game's intro video, you're then introduced to a hub world where you have access to all 4 of the game's dungeons. Traumatarium is non-linear, so you can complete these dungeons in any order you want. There's even a town center that you can enter that contains several vendors. There's an inn where you can spend the night and save your progress, and a shop where you can buy items like potions, food, and additional bandages. There's even a library that acts as kind of a mini tutorial. Here, you can learn all about how the game works. And lastly, there's an armory. Here, you can purchase new weapons. You begin the game with just enough money to buy a sword, and I'd highly recommend making this investment, as it dramatically increases your attack. Each dungeon contains 10 randomly generated rooms. Some rooms will give you the simple option of going left or right, while other rooms will give you the ultimatum to search them for items or leave. As you make your way through each dungeon, you will of course be attacked by all sorts of different creatures and hideous monsters. Combat is turn-based and extremely basic. You have the option to attack or use items to restore your health. But your health meter isn't the only thing you have to worry about. You also have to worry about your vitality. Your vitality bar drains with each room that you enter. Food and water is used to replenish it. But if your vitality runs out, your health meter will then slowly begin to drain. At the end of each dungeon, you must then defeat an evil spirit in the form of a stage boss fight. After beating all 4 dungeons, you can then enter the Traumatarium. Here, you must then fight all 4 evil spirits from each dungeon in a row. Only after defeating all 4 can you then face the game's final boss. I recently bought this game on sale for $5, and for that price, I feel that I definitely got my money's worth. It's a decent game and pretty much what I expected, but the developer Horatio.nyc has far better games available. Unlike most of the games on this list, Traumatarium also has a digital release available on the Switch. In the past, there was also a physical release that is still available on eBay, although nowadays it's not cheap. I had some fun playing this one, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. Download it from itch.io for $9.99. Up next on the list, we have the Mad Mage of the Mechanical Nightmare. This Lovecraftian horror story was made by an indie developer called Kratmang and takes place in the fictional city of Arkham. The people of Arkham have had to deal with their fair share of cosmic horrors over the years, but ever since the arrival and integration of strange beings called the Zoogs, the residents of Arkham had forgotten all about the evil entities and Lovecraftian gods that had once plagued their little town. But one night, a strange moon suddenly appeared above the city. At first, the people of Arkham ignored it. They assumed the Zoogs would deal with this new threat, and that mundane life would continue on. But the moon didn't go away. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Eventually, the people of Arkham became fearful of this strange moon that hovered above their homes. And then, the nightmares started. All across Arkham, people reported similar visions of a dark city full of strange mechanical monstrosities, all below an electric green sun. No one knew what was happening. It didn't make any sense. One by one, anyone who was having the nightmare slowly became obsessed with the strange mechanical city in their dreams. You play as Dr. Alec Muntz, a local psychologist who has begun studying the effects of the nightmare and how it makes people seemingly go insane. One by one, Dr. Muntz has watched all of her patients descend into madness. Dr. Muntz herself had never had the nightmare until last night. Having finally experienced the nightmare firsthand, Dr. Muntz decided that something had to be done. She would find who or whatever was causing the nightmare and put an end to it. Mad Mage has a classic overhead view. As Dr. Muntz, you must explore Arkham, investigate, and attempt to discover the source that is causing the nightmare. Most of the game sees the player questioning different people around town and finding items to help progress the story. Throughout the game, Dr. Muntz will be attacked by evil robots, deranged cult members, and other various Lovecraftian monsters. When battle occurs, the game changes to a first-person interface with an RPG turn-based combat system. You have the option to attack using your handgun, or you can damage your enemies using items called magic scrolls. For context, the magic scrolls began appearing throughout Arkham when the strange moon suddenly appeared in the sky. The magic scrolls can only be used once during battle, but you can find more of them hidden throughout Arkham. You can also obtain more scrolls by winning them after battle. If Dr. Muntz is injured, you can restore her health during and outside of battle. Health pills, like the magic scrolls, can be found through exploration. You can also go to the hospital that is run by the Zoogs. Here, they will restore your health and even give Dr. Muntz additional health pills. Throughout the game, fans of H.P. Lovecraft will notice subtle references to the famous author's work. It's quite obvious that the developer is a huge fan of the cosmic horror genre. Mad Mage of the Mechanical Nightmare was a fun experience and a game I'd highly recommend checking out, especially if you're a fan of H.P. Lovecraft. Download it for free from itch.io. And speaking of bad dreams, the next game on our list is in fact called Nightmare Grave Betrayal. Developed by Elvies, this side-scrolling horror game is the second in the Nightmare series, but is actually a prequel to its predecessor, Nightmare: The Ninth King. You play as the protagonist known as Sigrid, the adopted son of the King of Mortimer. Sigrid has left the comfort of his kingdom behind and has journeyed out in search of a mysterious force referred to as the Call. He believes a mysterious cult called the Church of Ol may have the answers he seeks. Nightmare Grave Betrayal is currently only a demo, so the rest of the story is still a bit murky, but the demo does feature the entire first level with a fun boss fight at the end. Right off the bat, the first thing players will notice is how the gameplay is very similar to Castlevania, but this makes sense, as the developer Elvies is a self-described Castlevania connoisseur. Sigrid has a powerful melee attack with his sword. He can also fire projectiles if he collects enough power-ups. Sigrid also possesses a nice bouncy jump, as well as a sliding move that can be used to fit through tight spots. Grave Betrayal is more similar to modern Castlevania games, as the gameplay is quick and fast, not sluggish like the old Game Boy Castlevania titles that we looked at earlier in the video. All in all, Nightmare Grave Betrayal is an excellent Castlevania clone, and a must-play for fans of the series. I really hope the developer expands on this concept in the future. Until then, download the demo for free from itch.io. Up next, we have a game called Buried Behind the Cabin. This disturbing horror game was developed by Juan O, an indie developer who's made other great GB Studio games like The Red Forest or Special Delivery. Buried Behind the Cabin follows the story of two old friends, Jimmy and Alan, as they head to a family cabin for the weekend. However, after arriving at the cabin, Alan suddenly pulls out a rifle and then proceeds to murder his friend Jimmy in cold blood. It is then eluded that this violent confrontation was due to Jimmy recently having an affair with Alan's wife. A time jump of 3 days then occurs. You then take control of our protagonist, Alan, who, as we all now know, is also a murderer. Your goal is to simply leave the cabin and go home, but as you attempt to leave, you realize that your car keys are missing. You must then explore the property and the surrounding woods and find some way to escape the cabin. And to make matters worse, as Alan desperately tries to find his keys, he's taunted and tormented by the sound of his dead friend's voice. Is it all in his head? Or is his friend Jimmy really back from beyond the grave? Buried Behind the Cabin features stunning visuals, competent gameplay, and a creepy story. Plus, with multiple endings, there's plenty of replay value. I had a surprisingly fun time playing this one, and I would highly recommend checking it out. My only complaint is the lack of sound effects and music. Don't get me wrong, this doesn't ruin the game, but I think a creepy soundtrack would have really complemented the story perfectly. You can download Buried Behind the Cabin for free from itch.io. Up next, we have a game called The Unknown Message. This point-and-click horror was developed by Wrong Way Games, the same creator who brought us Sacred Meat. Unknown Message is a Lovecraftian horror game that, believe it or not, takes place in the Pokemon universe. Join Dr. Leto and her Pokemon companion Hoot Hoot as they explore the ruins of Alpha. Recently, a groundbreaking discovery has caused major waves in the world of Pokescience. You play as Dr. Leto and have been hired to investigate a new chamber found within the ruins of Alpha. But what starts out as an exciting new discovery quickly takes a turn for the worse and becomes a terrifying nightmare. The gameplay begins after the intro video. With a first-person point-and-click interface, you begin in the main underground chamber, where you can move forward, left, and right into new chambers. In each new chamber, you can interact with people, objects, and ancient hieroglyphs on the chamber walls. Throughout the game, you must also solve different wall tile puzzles, just like in the original Pokemon games. As you explore and problem solve, your Pokemon partner Hoot Hoot is right there by your side. His main purpose is to save your progress, but you can also interact with Hoot Hoot whenever you want. Depending on the room that you're in, he'll react differently. Now, I have to admit, I was pretty skeptical when I first turned this game on. Pokemon games attempting horror have always felt kind of cheesy to me, but this wasn't the case for The Unknown Message. Somehow, cosmic horror and the unknown hieroglyph Pokemon blended seamlessly. I had an amazing time playing this one and would highly recommend it to both horror fans and Pokemon fans. Download it for free from itch.io. Up next, we have another fantastic homebrew called In This House. This story-driven horror game was made by a developer called Depressing Black. You play as Bianca, a young woman whose parents tragically passed away 5 years ago. Now, every year on the anniversary of her parents' death, Bianca, along with other relatives, visits her grandfather. But despite being a time when she needs her family the most, Bianca can't help but feel a bit unwelcome. As you explore your surroundings and are reunited with other relatives, it slowly becomes glaringly obvious that Bianca is the black sheep of her family. It seems that no matter how hard Bianca tries to be friendly and reconnect, her family has nothing but criticism for how she lives her life. And this is something that I think we can all relate to in some regard. In this house features a top-down perspective with non-linear gameplay. As Bianca, you have freedom to explore the entire house and interact with numerous objects and characters. When you speak to a relative, you're treated to a separate text-based interface featuring stunning visuals. To progress the game's story, the player must search the house for certain key items. Once again, the interface switches to a first-person point-and-click mode, allowing the player to interact with everything on screen. But the awkward family gathering is suddenly cut short when a frightening news broadcast starts. Bianca and her family learn that the rabies virus has somehow merged with COVID-19, and that this new hybrid virus seems to spread through bites and scratches. Those infected turn into mindless zombies and attack anything in sight. The news broadcast warns everyone to barricade their doors and stay inside at all costs. Now, as Bianca, you must attempt to make it through the night and protect your ungrateful family in the process. And amazingly enough, the infected aren't the only things Bianca has to worry about. As she tries to barricade her house, Bianca is haunted by some strange spirit. And what's even stranger is that this cryptic entity appears to be trying to communicate. Could it be a warning from beyond the grave, or something else? As Bianca tries to survive the night, she will discover and have to reconcile uncomfortable truths about her family and loved ones. In this house features mostly story-driven gameplay, but the game does mix things up a bit when Bianca encounters an enemy. If a zombie attacks Bianca, a QuickTime event then takes place where the player must quickly react by tapping a specific button, and surprisingly, QTE events work quite well on the Gameboy, and this risky choice ended up paying off well. Now currently, during the making of this video, there's only a demo version of this game available. You can download it for free from itch.io. However, the developer plans to have the full game ready for release in May of 2025. Currently, you can help back the project through Kickstarter.com. Personally, I had an amazing time playing this demo, and I can't wait for the full version. In This House is sure to be a horror classic, and is a must-play for horror fans. Next up, we're having a look at a game called Soul Void Redux. This unique visual horror experience was created by a developer called Katabura. The story follows an unnamed protagonist who was woken up and found herself trapped in a strange world. Our protagonist has no idea where she is or how she even got there. And to make matters worse, the cryptic residents that reside here don't seem to be exactly sure where here even is. As you question some of the more lucid beings who are willing to talk, they imply that this strange land is some kind of a purgatory for lost souls, and surprisingly, the souls trapped here have made the most of their circumstances. Some are even happy. They've created a small town where they all live, and they even have a town mayor. Throughout your investigation, you eventually discover that your only chance for escape is to traverse the outer lands surrounding the village. The locals refer to the outer lands as the Soul Void. Our protagonist is then warned that anyone trapped in the Soul Void for too long eventually transforms into a hideous monster, as the void distorts and perverts their immortal soul. As you explore the Soul Void, you will come into contact with numerous entities trapped there that have slowly morphed into hideous creatures. Some of these beings are friendly and will aid you in your quest, while others are dangerous and simply want to be left alone to wallow in their pain. As you search for a way out, you will occasionally have to solve rudimentary puzzles to progress the game. At other points, you must also find key items in order to move on. But the majority of the game focuses on exploration and interacting with the Lovecraftian monsters littered throughout the void. In fact, my favorite part about Soul Void is all the exceptional pixel art and stunning visuals that you're treated to throughout your long journey. And when I say long journey, I'm not exaggerating. If you've already beaten this game, you could maybe speedrun it in about 30 minutes, but if this is your first playthrough, it will take you at least an hour and a half to beat. As I mentioned earlier, you'll need specific items from certain NPCs, so this means you'll pretty much have to speak with every character you find. You can also interact with numerous objects, creatures, and landmarks throughout the Soul Void. This game truly has a lot of content. If you're taking your time and smelling the roses, Soul Void could easily entertain someone for a good 3 or 4 hours. It's actually pretty rare for a Game Boy homebrew to pack this much gameplay, and I was especially impressed that Soul Void kept my attention for the entire time. Download this visual masterpiece for free from itch.io. Soul Void is one that I would highly recommend checking out. Next up, we have another one of my absolute favorite horror games for the Game Boy. Let's play Decline. This short yet unsettling horror game was made by Ben Jelter, the same developer that made Opossum Country. This story-driven horror game follows a veteran police officer named Gale. Close to retirement, Gale is assigned to a homicide investigation surrounding a violent death that occurred at a local elementary school. Gale's investigation eventually leads her to an arcade where the legendary game Polybius seems to have something to do with the children in town acting strangely. As more homicides occur, Gale struggles to make sense of a conspiracy involving the CIA, brainwashed children, and an evil entity that the kids refer to as the Glitch Witch. All throughout Gale's investigation, she is also unfairly scrutinized, all because of how old she is. People assume her inability to solve this strange case is due to her own mental decline. With stunning visuals, a terrifying story, and multiple endings, Decline is one of the better homebrew horrors currently available, and is without a doubt a must-play for horror fans. You can download Decline for free from itch.io, and as I mentioned earlier, there's also a physical compilation cartridge that features Decline, Opossum Country, and a Game Boy Color game called Specimen 134. The Metamorphosis collection can be purchased through incubategames.com. Before we have a look at the last 3 games on our list, I have one honorable mention. Let's play the Scary Maze game. This obscure port was developed by Gameboy Games and was originally an entry in the GB 2021 compo. The Scary Maze game was immensely popular back in 2003 and became somewhat of an early internet phenomenon. This Game Boy port is a faithful and accurate recreation of the famous internet game that shocked a generation over 20 years ago. Now, for anyone young watching that has never heard of the Scary Maze game, gameplay consists of completing multiple simple mazes. The player must complete each map without touching any of the walls. Then, at a preset point, a terrifying jump scare suddenly occurs that can be quite jarring to players, especially if they're not expecting it. Now, similar to the original, this fun little homebrew features very little gameplay, but the Scary Maze game is still an important part of jump scare internet history, and I'm very happy to see it preserved here on the Game Boy. You can download the Scary Maze game for free from itch.io, or if you want, you can buy a physical version from etsy.com for about $30. The third last game on our list is another one of my personal favorites. Let's play Neighbor. This story-driven horror game was developed by fan favorite Horatio.nyc, the same developer that brought us Bitterroot and Traumatarium. In Neighbor, you play as an unnamed female protagonist who has just moved into a new apartment. But she will soon find out that this new chapter in her life will quickly change into an absolute horror story. While moving in, our excited protagonist says hi to her one neighbor that resides in the building. Everything seems fine at first, until the conversation gets a little weird. Our friendly new neighbor, whose name is Chase, warns her to always lock her door at night, and then he mentions that it's a bad idea to leave the unit after dark. Now obviously, this ominous warning strikes our protagonist as a bit of a concerning red flag. But as she's already exhausted from the long move, she decides to go to bed and look into it in the morning. But in the middle of the night, our unlikely hero is awoken by strange sounds outside of her door, and when she goes to investigate, she makes a horrifying discovery that will change the rest of her life. Neighbor is an exciting horror story that unfolds throughout several chapters, taking place at different locations. What begins as a fairly predictable plot will slowly unfold into a terrifying conspiracy that is seemingly unescapable. With an over-the-head point of view, Neighbor features gameplay that some might describe as an interactive movie. Most of the game is scripted and there's no combat, but there are still many parts of the game where the player must problem solve and find items to help progress the story. But gameplay mostly revolves around making decisions that will affect the player's outcome. Similar to old choose-your-own-adventure books, you will constantly have to make decisions that have life and death consequences. Trial and error is a big part of the game and the progression of the story. But fortunately, the game constantly autosaves with each room you enter. This way, you can make bad choices, learn from your mistakes, and immediately carry on without being penalized. With amazing visuals and a truly disturbing story, Neighbor is a horror game that is a must-play for fans of the genre. Download this horror masterpiece for free from itch.io. And while you're there, check out some of the other great horror games from this developer, such as Cargo, After, or Traumatarium 2, Pennant. Second last on the list, we have a game that I think will be a future classic. Let's play Bad Isabella. Released in 2022, this raunchy horror comedy was made by indie developer Ice Cold Blood. You play as the bodacious, raven-haired hottie, Bad Isabella. If she looks familiar, it's because Batty is almost definitely inspired by the famous horror icon, Elvira. As Batty, you must rescue your family and exterminate the evil phantoms that are haunting your home. With a first-person point-and-click interface, Bad Isabella features gameplay that is kind of similar to classics like Shadowgate or The Uninvited. The game begins with our beautiful protagonist waking up in bed. You're then provided some trivial fetch quests, such as finding batteries and making her son breakfast. This allows the player to explore Batty's house and get used to the controls and the point-and-click interface, which I'll admit can be a bit confusing at first. However, Bad Isabella isn't a slow burn like most point-and-click games. Only after completing a few rudimentary puzzles does the action kick into high gear when Batty is suddenly attacked by some strange supernatural creature. When Batty wakes up, she's shocked to find herself trapped in a dungeon. She has no idea where she is or why she's been imprisoned. From this point, the game's difficulty increases quite a bit. Not only do the puzzles become more complicated, but there are now evil spirits haunting both the dungeon as well as Batty's house, which we eventually discover is built above the dungeon. As you navigate your way through the underground maze, you will be under constant attack by evil phantoms. Now you have the option to leave them be and simply move on. However, this means taking damage if you ever revisit that part of the map. Eventually, I found it more beneficial to simply dispatch each phantom as I found them. To fight the phantoms, Batty has an ancient hairpin that has been passed down through her family for generations. The real-time combat doesn't have any turns and isn't like most battle systems featured in point-and-click games. During a fight, you simply move the cursor to your target and then mash the A button. However, Batty's charmed hairpin is only good for one battle before its power has to be restored. To recharge the ancient heirloom, Batty must return to a shrine located in the top floor of her house. At first, constantly backtracking back and forth can be a little annoying, but once you learn the layout of the house and understand the controls, you can move from one end of the map to the other in under 20 seconds. And trust me, you'll be navigating your way all around Batty's house constantly, not just to recharge her magical hairpin, but to find clues and other hidden items. Like I said earlier, the puzzles featured in Batty Isabella get increasingly difficult, and trust me, this game does not hold your hand. For example, there's one point in the game where your only clue is that you must somehow turn on Batty's television. By the way, you learn this clue from Batty's husband, who, as you can see, happens to be a bat. Knowing that the next puzzle has something to do with the TV, you attempt to turn it on, but can't because the remote control is missing, so naturally, the player will attempt to find it. And when you eventually click on the couch, Batty then exclaims, and I quote, "I could check that couch 10 times and still not find that remote." Now, I must admit I was stuck on this puzzle for a while, and spoiler alert, Batty saying that she could check the couch 10 times and not find the remote is actually a hidden clue directing the player to actually click on the couch 10 times in order to find the remote. Like, talk about thinking outside the box. When this revelation dawned on me, I gleefully turned my Game Boy back on and was ecstatic to find out that I was correct. Now personally, I found the problem solving in this game to be a lot of fun and quite charming. However, some gamers may be turned off as some of the puzzles featured are very vague and quite difficult. For that reason, I'd recommend referencing an online walkthrough if you're stuck. Throughout the game, there's 3 major boss battles. Once again, Batty can attack using her enchanted hairpin. Only during a boss fight, you can't simply move the cursor to them and tap the A button. Small targets will appear in a pattern around the boss's body. You must then learn the pattern so you can predict where the next target will appear and have your cursor ready and waiting. Despite the challenging gameplay, Batty Isabella was a truly fun experience and a game that I would highly recommend checking out. Both the horror fan and casual gamer will love this one. Download this future classic from itch.io for $6.66, or you can order a complete in-box physical version from Retro Room Games for $85. And finally, we have the last game on our list. Let's play Dedis. This groundbreaking horror game was released in 2019 and was created by a developer called Isma. Like most of the games on this list, Dedis was developed using GB Studio, and while it wasn't the first horror game to ever come out on the Game Boy, Dedis was the first to really shine a spotlight on the massive potential for horror on the original Game Boy. The story follows an unnamed protagonist, a small boy who one night has a terrifying nightmare about a cosmic god that calls itself Dedis. During the dream, the divine being warns the small boy that in 3 days, Dedis will resurrect itself and end the lives of everyone in his small town. When the boy awakes from his strange dream, he's at first in a state of disbelief. His mom chalks it up to simply a bad dream, and then convinces him to not worry about it. But as the boy speaks to other kids in town, he's disturbed to find out that every other child has had the exact same nightmare. Now, as the small boy, you must investigate this cosmic threat, find out who or what Dedis is, and more importantly, if it can be stopped. With completely non-linear gameplay, Dedis features 11 different endings. Who you talk to and what you do will set your character on one of many branching paths that lead to both good and bad outcomes. Now, if you're an action junkie, be forewarned, Dedis doesn't feature any kind of interactive fighting or combat. It's completely story-driven, but the disturbing plot and exceptional pacing make Dedis a hard game to put down. This game does an amazing job at creating an intense feeling of impending doom. I especially liked how interactions with other characters in town got more odd and sinister with each passing day. It's heavily implied that the adults in town are fully aware of what's happening, and what's even more disturbing is that most of the townsfolk, including your mom, seem to welcome their imminent demise. Now, I could talk about Dedis for hours on end, but I definitely don't want to spoil it for anyone who hasn't tried it yet. But if it isn't obvious, I'm kind of a big fan of this game, and I would highly recommend checking it out. Dedis is a game that horror fans will absolutely love, but I think most casual gamers will also enjoy this one. Download Dedis for free from itch.io, or if you're a big spender, you can buy a physical CIB version from Incubate Games for $85. And once again, I really can't recommend this game enough. If there's one game on this entire list that you have to check out, it is definitely Dedis.
All right, son, point out the animal that did this to you.
Well, horror fans, that is the end of the video. Thanks so much for watching, it really means a lot to me. I hope everyone had fun learning about horror games for the battery-munching monster known as the Gameboy. If there's any games I missed, please let me know in the comments below. Once again, thanks for watching, and I will see everyone in the next video.